To say that North Carolina's coastline is unique is an understatement. Compared to most other East Coast states, we have a very long coastline, but we don't have a deep water port.
Our large sounds, Core, Pamlico, and Albemarle, behind barrier islands are rarely more than 20 feet deep. These shallow coastal waters offer exquisite beauty and are critical nurseries for finfish and shellfish. These coastal waters and the lands around them are an integral part of North Carolina's economy and worthy of protection and our attention. One of North Carolina's finest writers and musicians, Bland Simpson, is a keen and distinguished professor at UNC Chapel Hill and a recipient of the North Carolina Award. Bland grew up in Elizabeth City and has written about North Carolina's coastal region in numerous books and articles. We asked Bland Simpson what makes the North Carolina coast so appealing and why it is so important to the North Carolina story and its economy.
I think the sense of how far away from everything the Outer Banks were and are is what appealed to people in the 19th century who used to go out and stay on Soundside, in Soundside hotels and take little donkey tram carts over to the sea beach where there was virtually nothing built because everybody back then seemed to understand that if you could see the ocean could see you, and that danger was to be had there on the sea beach. I would say birds, weather, the distance, and just the abject beauty of it, of those coastlines, most of which, until fairly recently, were fairly empty.
In the last couple of generations, we have not been kind to North Carolina's coastal waters. I asked Bland Simpson about the waters around Elizabeth City while he was growing up.
When I lived here in the 1950s, we had a water treatment plant, but there were neighborhoods I know that had that tied their outflow, shall we say, into pipes that just went off into the river down the way. I saw these, and it wasn't a very pretty sight. I came to learn not too many years ago. I found a clipping in some of my father's papers. He made a presentation to the town board saying we need a new modern water treatment plant. We need to clean up this dirty river. This is a real treasure. And I knew from the time I was a small boy that we could play along the river. We could throw rocks if we could find them. We could do all that, but we couldn't swim in it. To swim, we had to go way downriver, 8 or 10 miles to Texaco Beach, which the Texaco Oil Company set up, a recreation beach. But it was miles and miles, I think, and the idea was the dilution of those miles would have kind of cleared things out by then. But we all knew, and I'm sure it's the first time I ever heard the word polluted, that the Pasquotank was a polluted river. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful. This is one of the nicest natural spots for a community, for a settlement, anywhere in North Carolina. We knew the river was beautiful, and we also knew it was dirty. It was a real shame. And I remember my father's sense of that from a very young age.
There is no better way to learn than by spending time on the water. Few fishermen have spent more hours or have observed our coast more closely than Willie Phillips. Willie is owner of Full Circle Crab Company in Columbia, North Carolina. We asked Willie Phillips about the changes he has seen in the productivity of our estuaries in recent decades.
I think there have been significant changes in our resources. They have not responded well to the amount of pressure that's been put on them both recreationally and commercially. In many instances, the waters are unfit for raising the number of fish and shellfish that we need to keep our population satisfied when they take that grandchild's fishing for the first time. There are a lot of opportunities for improvement along our coast, and the fish stocks are certainly cyclical, and you'll have boom and bust depending on what favorable environmental conditions provide. But generally, I'd say that we're in a compromised system presently, and there's a lot of need for improvement.
I asked Phillips what factors have affected water quality and the productivity of finfish and shellfish in recent decades.
I think certainly the point source discharges that occur up and down our major river systems contribute hormones, drugs, chemicals like the Gen X fiasco, and numerous other chemicals that are basically just dumped into the river systems as an easy means of disposal. There's a whole host of opportunities for us to make a difference in the nursery function of our system, but we have to have the political will to do it, and we have to have the leaders that will listen to the people.
For change to occur on the North Carolina coast, it takes government, industry, and citizens willing to deal with hard questions. Todd Miller is president and founder of the North Carolina Coastal Federation, which was formed more than 3 decades ago to address issues in North Carolina's coastal waters and lands. We asked Todd Miller to tell us about the origins of the Coastal Federation.
So those early years, originally I was the only employee, but we went from there to gradually over the years adding people. Originally the Federation was purely an advocacy organization. We talked about policy and management and worked on enforcement of environmental rules for the coast. But over the years we transitioned because we realized that alone wasn't going to be enough. It was too much of a reactive thing that you really had to build people's belief and ownership that the coast was important and needed to be protected. And so we expanded into environmental education and then into habitat restoration and protection. So as we did that, we added staff, and we're up to about 30 people now that are in 3 offices on our coast, in Wanchese, Ocean, North Carolina, and then in Wrightsville Beach. And we have anywhere from 5,000 to 7,000 hours of volunteer help.
The North Carolina Coastal Federation has dealt with many issues on the coast over the years. I asked Todd Miller what makes North Carolina's coast unique, worthy of the dedication of so many volunteers.
But we all feel that our coast is really the envy of the world, and not just the nation, but the world. And in my work, I actually get to interact with groups around the country that do similar activities, and we visit each other's estuaries, and I have yet to go to another place that I would trade places with in terms of what we have here and what these other locations are dealing with as they become more urbanized and have not been able to protect what really drew people there, in the beginning. So, I mean, our coastal system is very fragile. If we don't take care of it, we can see from going elsewhere, we'll destroy it. And getting it back is almost impossible. I mean, you can do some things to improve the situation, but it would never be the jewel that it once was. And so if we don't develop correctly and live within the limits of the system, we'll mess it up just like everybody else has done, pretty much everywhere else in the world.
Many issues facing our state and nation have gotten bogged down in partisanship and the inability to come together to solve common problems. I asked Todd Miller how the Coastal Federation chooses projects and how it works as an honest broker to bring together competing stakeholders.
Many of the projects we get involved in, people bring them to us, and they've already risen to a level that somebody's worried about something or sees an opportunity. And the common denominator is that there's a lot of shared care and love for our coast among everybody. And people love the seafood, they love to go fish. Many people, their livelihoods are tied economically to a healthy resource. So you don't have to look very hard to find common ground. And the hardest part is getting over the polarization that too frequently occurs, over issues that get in the way of actually the most important things in terms of working together on protecting a resource such as our North Carolina coast.
We looked at many projects in which the North Carolina Coastal Federation has been involved and decided to look at the building of oyster reefs. This is a great example of how the Coastal Federation has brought together a state agency, a large private business, and the expertise of the Coastal Federation in a project to improve oyster habitat, water quality, and the economy of eastern North Carolina. All the parties involved invited Exploring North Carolina to watch the building of an oyster sanctuary in the southern Pamlico Sound near Cedar Island, one of several that will be built in our coastal sounds. We asked Jason Peters, coordinator of artificial reefs for the North Carolina Division of Marine Fisheries, to tell us about this project.
The reason why we build oyster sanctuaries in a body of water like the Pamlico Sound is for a number of different reasons. Oyster sanctuaries or oyster reefs are native to this area. There are many reefs that are already in existence. Reefs themselves are interconnected in a big body of water like this. The oyster sanctuaries serve a purpose of restoration whereby we can protect certain habitats, reefs, so that they can provide additional larvae or additional individuals to the system. It's actually very effective in a large body like this because of water currents. The hydrodynamics of Pamlico Sound in particular are such that if we strategically place oyster sanctuaries, we can restore habitats throughout the sound with small, relatively small footprint reefs.
We also asked Jason Peters how many oysters make up this artificial reef and how they benefit the waters of Pamlico Sound.
We've observed oyster population densities upwards of several hundred per square meter. The benefit of that many oysters in such a small area or anywhere is the ecosystem services that the oysters provide. So ecosystem services being water column filtration, which creates clean water for the entire sound or the water body where the reef is located. They provide shoreline stabilization, protects the shoreline from wind events or wave events, from erosion. Something called carbon sequestration, and something called nitrogen removal. And then recreational fisheries. Of course, you can't harvest oysters from a sanctuary, but you can harvest finfish. So they're excellent fishing grounds. This particular reef that we're on, Swan Island, we anticipate to be an excellent spot for large red drum fishing, flounder fishing, trout fishing, and a number of other recreationally important or recreationally targeted species.
Projects of this magnitude require a major investment in equipment. Simon Rich, general manager and partner of Stevens Towing Company, told us about the work of his company in this partnership to improve Tar Heel coastal waters.
100 years ago, there were vast reefs in the Pamlico Sound. They stretched for miles along the marshlands that bordered the Sound. Today, we have just a fraction of those reefs. Stevens Towing is partnering with North Carolina Division of Marine Fisheries and the North Carolina Coastal Federation on this reef project. This 15 acres is part of a 50-acre larger project which should be completed by 2020. What we bring to the table is large-scale equipment and industrial scale and size equipment that can build these reefs at a pace that would otherwise be unachievable. It helps marine fisheries achieve their target goals of building acres in the Sound, and it helps the Coastal Federation's mission of clean water in our state. So these reefs are built out of limestone marl. It's mined locally in North Carolina, not far from New Bern. It's trucked to a stockpile site where it's loaded onto barge. We transport the limestone to the reef site on this large barge and unload it with loaders and excavators. Limestone is a great substrate because it closely resembles an oyster shell in its makeup. What we're building today is a no-harvest sanctuary. The intended design is to provide the seed source for countless acres on the shoreline. It also acts as a giant filter. There's approximately 1 million oysters per acre, so that's 15 million oysters on this reef. It's a tremendous amount of clean water back into the Pamlico Sound. The habitat this reef provides and the clean water ultimately increase the populations of fin fish and crustaceans in the Sound, which is great for everybody on the coast and in the state. In building this reef, we at Stevens Towing are trying to do our part to help commercial fishermen, recreational fishermen, and the coastal economy of North Carolina.
As we observed this incredible project in the middle of Pamlico Sound, we were impressed by several things. First, we were amazed by the skill of the heavy equipment operators and the precision of the work. We noted that the plume, created by limestone being placed in the water, completely dissipated within a couple of hours. Most importantly, we came away knowing that this single sanctuary, which will be home to 15 million oysters, each filtering up to 50 gallons per day, will filter 750 million gallons of water every day in Pamlico Sound. This is great for the marine environment and our coastal economy. Jason Peters tells us why such projects are a win-win for everyone.
For the North Carolina Division of Marine Fisheries, for the North Carolina Coastal Federation, and for Stevens Towing, we all benefit some way. The Division of Marine Fisheries gets to work with the Coastal Federation, where they can advocate for the work that we're doing, help leverage funds, and then coordinate with folks like Stevens Towing, who have the expertise and the equipment to come out here and really do oyster restoration and reef construction on a large scale, a scale that the division doesn't have the resources to build at that scale. So it's really a beautiful agreement of all of these groups so that we can create some nice oyster habitat.
Replacing oyster reefs in coastal sounds can go a long way toward cleaning up water. North Carolinians living upriver and around our coastal waters must also do more to protect our coastal treasures. Here, the use of buffers and low-impact development come into play. Bland Simpson and Todd Miller explain.
You know, for a couple of generations we've been dealing, I think, pretty effectively with point source pollution. You know, some concern that's located on the side of the river, and you can see what its outflow is. That's not hard to find and ultimately to fix. But non-point pollution into streams and rivers, just generalized stuff, you know, the stormwater, which goes into drains or just rolls over the sides of banks and walls. That's a harder matter. And we have to use a number of tools. The Coastal Federation is in favor of buffers, vegetated buffers, and in favor of, as in North River Farms, of closing the V-ditches and slowing down the outflow from the big farm to our north, as well as changing the contours of the land. We use a number of techniques. Low-impact development, where a building, say, is going to be somewhere near a stream or a ditch that goes into a stream that goes into the river. If that building is encouraged to have its parking lot made with permeable material or concrete that's got lacing in it, so the water, whichever way, the water soaks in rather than gathers whatever pollutants are on the surface and roars off, that's a big difference. Now, it may just be a quarter-acre parking lot for one small building, but you multiply that across, you know, get it up to scale, and low-impact development, LID, has an impact. So it's really a matter of finding the ways to discuss that. And the Coastal Federation's been very fortunate in a number of counties and communities up and down the coast of putting this idea of low-impact development and showing how it really helps us all, ultimately, in terms of the overall goal of clean water on the coast. Where it's clean, keep it clean. Where it's impaired, let's clean it up.
Particularly in eastern North Carolina, the best buffer is a big sponge. And a lot of this land served as a sponge and would soak up the water and, again, slowly release it out into the estuary. So you need enough of a set-aside area that you can create or replicate that natural sponge and control the movement of water. And here on the coast, our challenge is even a little more daunting than inland in that we're certainly worried about nutrients and chemicals and things like that, and buffers help with that, but we're also worried about not changing the salinity of our estuaries. And if you don't meter out the flow, you get these radical shifts in salinity from rainfall events to drought that actually create a huge amount of stress in the estuary. So the buffers are essential to basically provide a sponge to soak up the drainage that occurs. And it's not just farmland. I mean, we're talking about ditched forest land, we're talking about the urban areas. The old way of thinking was to get the water off as quickly as possible, and that's not the way we should be thinking anymore.
There are other issues facing coastal North Carolinians now and in coming generations: warming waters and a changing climate. Willie Phillips explains how these changes are affecting life on the water.
Here in Tyrrell County, where we live, we're basically at ground zero. If you look at all of the flood maps, you'll notice the projections are we'll be completely underwater in no time. Where I live is 1.5 feet above sea level. It's in a broad swamp zone. Over the years, the land that we live on was at one time a farm. Then it was logged after it grew up in pine, and now you couldn't grow myrtle bushes on it. The water is coming up from below as much as it is coming from the sea level rise. We have a land subsidence that's occurring. We have a vegetation change, which is easy to see. There is a certainty that things are changing drastically and dramatically. And in the swamp, things change quick. It's not like the Piedmont where the land use is the same for generation after generation. Here, things change dramatically, and it's within a generation you can experience some real issues. And I think that's what Tyrrell County in particular has become a hub for research, to see exactly how it's happening, how fast it's happening, and how we will address it.
The water problems facing our coast must be solved by people coming together and dealing with myriad issues. We were privileged to meet with Governor Roy Cooper, who talked about these challenges.
With climate change and with sea level rise, we need to be smart about how we approach development on our coast. A while back in North Carolina, we passed the Coastal Area Management Act where decisions were made intentionally about understanding the forces of nature and what's going to happen. I think what we have to do is to make sure that our elected leaders, our planners, look at the data, look at the science. The private companies and the insurance companies, all of them are looking at it. And they understand that this is an issue that we have to face. I love going to our beaches and want to keep doing it. But we have to also understand the realities of our future and what's going to happen, and we have to plan for that so that we can be smart about it.
The problems facing the North Carolina coast in the coming decades are complex, but we have seen many good people working toward a quality environment and a strong economy. Success will only come if we work together, and we learned this while exploring North Carolina.